Right, so for the sake of argument, I think Maya Angelou is a great poet. You think she's terrible. How can you be so sure that you're right about this and that I'm wrong?
Well, as with any writer, there are objective ways to classify things. In writing, for example, the biggest single thing that is rather obvious, because most people, you can sort of numerically get a sort of counter going in your head. It's like watching an old Terminator movie where he would see, you'd see from his point of view, and he'd count up 17 people that he just passed by. Well, if you're reading something over and over again, and you're reading the poems of a Maya Angelou or a Donald Hall or any bad writer, or if you're watching a bad filmmaker, you're going to see the same number of cliches over and over again. You're going to see bad line breaks. For example, you'll see, and you'll see and just dangling at the end of a line where there's no rhyming reason for it. There's no musical. There's no syllabic reason for it to be there. It's not even a dramatic reason that the and is amplified because the word that comes after it has some great import. And so when you have these objective criteria, you can say, okay, this poet, let's say Robert Hayden, just to use another Black American poet against Angelou, or Robert Hayden doesn't have that. Will have those musical or dramatic or syllabic reason for why he breaks a line at some place. 95 times out of 100. 95 times out of 100, a Maya Angelou will not. A Maya Angelou will, again, have a lot of cliches. She'll throw out bon mots, like love is important. Whereas someone like a Robert Hayden, in a great poem like, what was the one about those winter Sundays, is probably his most famous poem. He'll talk about uh, about the angers of that house. And we don't know exactly what he's talking about. Is he talking about child abuse? Is he talking about the father's impotent rage against being a black man struggling against American society? And there's a handful of other ways you can read that. Not an infinite amount, but a handful of other ways. You don't get that kind of duplicity or multiplicity of meaning that you get in Hayden with someone like Maya Angelou. With a Maya Angelou, you'll also get the attendant baggage of being told that rape is wrong, or that racism is wrong, or that war is wrong, and you will be told in very blatant ways. Okay, again, this gets back to bumper stickering. Someone like a Robert Hayden, or just to stick with a black poet, James Emanuel, won't do that. If you compare side by side their writings, it becomes rather obvious. Now, someone who isn't familiar with these writers or these poets isn't going to be able to see that. And this is why it's important to read, or it's important to engage whatever art you're in. You're not going to become a great filmmaker if you don't watch the films of a great filmmaker like Stanley Kubrick or Orson Welles. If you're only watching Michael Bay, or you're only watching some other, filmmaker that does melodramas, you're not going to learn how to do something. Uh, uh, so, I mean, this is a kind of question I could go on for 60 minutes, but in just 3 or 4 minutes, that's the way. There are objective criteria, whether people want to admit it or not. And someone like a Maya Angelou in poetry, or a James Tate, or a Donald Hall, someone like a David Foster Wallace, or a Dave Eggers, or a T.C. Boyle, or Joyce Carol Oates in prose, they don't make it. Or like the bad filmmakers like a Michael Bay or a Steven Spielberg or a Ron Howard, they indulge cliches. You compare, someone like a Stanley Kubrick, his best films, to a Ron Howard. You know, compare Apollo 13 to 2001: A Space Odyssey. Well, they're both stories about going into outer space. One stupidly follows a story that we know the historic outcome in, what it's going to be. But even if we don't, every cliche is hit. There's three people. There's dissension in the pod. Are they going to make it or not? Someone does something. You get the faux close-ups of intense worry. You don't get any of that in 2001. And I'm using the visual metaphor because it's easier. It's easier for someone to compare because even if I were to be able to quote a Maya Angelou poem versus another better poet like a Robert Hayden and line by line, just talking about it, listening to the audio or the video of this is not going to trying to give visual metaphor using Ron Howard and Stanley Kubrick as stand-ins for Angelou and Hayden. But that the basic idea is the same.